Seen this video yet and wondered what's going on?
How can you get a comprehensive immigration policy when you're defining it from the very get-go? You're building it on false premises and false tenets.
Respectfully, Congressman, you could pass bipartisan legislation, and that would be comprehensive immigration law.
I've had like 5 different people send it to me, so I figured it's probably time we broke it down. I'm Brian, I make videos about civics and law. Let's talk about this. But first, what's happening? This is Mayor Wu of Boston and Arizona Congressman Gosar at a recent hearing. And there were multiple mayors there. The mayor of New York, the mayor of Chicago. But the big exchange from the day seems to be this one.
I'm not familiar with that law because I'm focused on the city of Boston, but we follow all state, city, and federal laws in Boston.
So we're going to break it down. Congressman Gosar talks about federal control of immigration. First, the fact that Arizona tried to pass its own immigration law and was shot down by the Supreme Court because only the federal government can pass immigration laws. Here he goes.
SB 1070 challenged the federal government on its Supremacy Clause. Because we, in Arizona, wanted, the government wasn't doing anything, so we thought, we'll do this. We can't allow them to break laws. The Supreme Court ruled that, struck it down. Now, it seems contraindicating here that you would have supported SB 1070.
So, point 1. The federal government controls immigration. Is he right? Yes. Why? Surprisingly, there is no clear answer. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, I believe, gives Congress control over naturalization, which is who can be a citizen. That means who gets to stay here for good, who gets to vote, and early on, the Supreme Court gave the federal government power over immigration under that clause. But over time, they decided, that's not quite strong enough. The clause specifically says naturalization, citizenship. That's not immigration. So the Supreme Court has been back and forth for years over exactly how the federal government has power over immigration, but one thing it has never wavered on is that the federal government does have that power. I'm not going to go into this whole argument because it would take me a whole video. For now, we're just going to have to agree the federal government controls immigration. And it's rooted somewhere in the Constitution, but the court can't seem to decide where. Which is why Arizona was not allowed to write its law. Okay, the congressman goes through and asks each mayor whether they supported Arizona's right to pass their own immigration laws. Each mayor says, we follow all local, state, and federal laws, and that's sort of the end of it.
Mayor Johnson, would you have supported SB 1070, allowing Arizona to follow their own laws? Because that's what you're doing right here.
Thank you, Congressman. We currently follow all federal law, all state law, and all local law. So we do not have any Supremacy Clause challenges that we're pursuing or maintaining.
Then the congressman comes back with the gotcha. What happens when federal and local laws conflict? Because these guys have all been brought in because their cities don't support federal immigration laws.
What happens when you get in conflict with them? Who do you support?
And he thinks, ooh, I got you now, because before I was on the local side, and now I'm on the federal side, so you gotta pick one. And Mayor Wu says something, and she's missing a couple of points here, but here's what she says.
The Constitution, as I understand it, doesn't require cities or police officers or anyone to follow their laws in conflict, follow federal laws in conflict with local laws or state law.
Now, I'm going to fill this in a little bit, but essentially what she's saying here is that local police can't be forced to follow federal law. Ooh, where are we now? And so the congressman comes and tries to close his trap. Here's what he says.
Okay, in the Constitution it says, and it's explicit, that the federal government has jurisdiction and supremacy over all immigration laws, right? I mean, I've heard it a number of times from my colleagues over here. We're the ones who can define that.
Gotcha, Supremacy Clause. Federal law trumps local, Fed controls immigration, boop, 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 boop. We got a feedback loop. Okay, so who's right and who's wrong? Problem is, they're both right, we're just missing some information. I'm going to toss in a quick map of our federal constitution. I'm not going to do too deep of a dive on this. If you want to learn more about this map, it's in a bunch of other videos. But real quick, federalism divides the national federal government from the states, individuals, everybody else. The 7 articles of the Constitution are up here above the federalism wall. They tell us what the federal government can do. Down here below the federalism wall is the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, the states, and all the people that live in the states. This is all the stuff the federal government cannot do. Every federal government power has to come from somewhere up here in the articles. And the 10th Amendment here drives the point home by saying that any power not listed up here belongs to the states and respectively to the people. And in my video on the 10th Amendment, we broke down why the people are added to the end. In short, even if the states voluntarily want to let the federal government move across this federalism wall and exercise powers that are not enumerated here in the articles, they're not allowed to do it because the 10th Amendment says this protection is not here for the states, but for the people in the states. So the states cannot waive federalism. And one of the primary rules of federalism is that the federal government is not allowed to order the states to exercise any power on its behalf. So, what does that tell us about our situation? Does the federal government control immigration? Yes. And that power is rooted somewhere up here, although I'm not entirely sure where. And as a result, the state of Arizona was not allowed to make a law that defined who was allowed to cross the country's borders. But the federal government is also not allowed to order any state to enforce immigration laws on the federal government's behalf. So how does that play out in real life? Well, I found two cases that seem to demonstrate it pretty well. One case is from 1999, another is from 2017, 2019. It worked its way up through the courts kind of slowly. Both cases involve a local government who's concerned that enforcing federal immigration laws are going to create a rift between their police enforcement and local immigrant communities. In other words, they're concerned that if their local police get a reputation for turning immigrants into immigration authorities, immigrant communities will stop calling the police when crimes occur. And this will be bad for everybody. So both of these governments want to send a message to their local immigrant communities that their police are not going to turn them into immigration authorities. One of these government actions is overturned and the other is upheld. Let's look at the difference. The first is New York City v. US in 1999. Follow me for a second, it's a little bit confusing. An executive order from President Bush barred local governments from banning its employees from turning immigrants into ICE. In other words, if New York City wanted to pass a law that said, our employees are not allowed to turn people into immigration authorities, they were not allowed to do that. New York City fought that executive order and lost. The Supreme Court said the federal government was not forcing them to do anything. If they had been, they would have won. But because the executive order was a ban on bans against voluntarily turning people in, no one was forcing anyone to do anything. There's a lot of double negatives in there and it's a little hard to follow. But that's on one end. On the other end, in 2017 to 2019, we had the state of California passing a law that said, we, the state of California, except in certain situations with dangerous criminals or something like that, are not going to turn people who are picked up by our police force into immigration authorities. Full stop. And the federal government sued them, and the federal government lost. Because in that case, the federal government is not allowed to force the state of California to comply with anything. Unlike the New York case where nobody was forcing anything, they were disallowing a disallowing of a volunteer action, California was actively deciding a policy. We're not going to do this. And they don't have to. Local police don't have to follow federal law. Immigration is a federal power, and the 10th Amendment prevents the federal government from enforcing it on the states. Now the problem is, these two standards, these two cases, are both a little soft. So we have two solid bookends on either end, but in the middle things do get a little shifty, and the middle is where things are probably going to get fought out. So unfortunately, the statements that were made in Congress were kind of boiled down to talking points, so they're a little easy to clarify, get into boxes, and figure out which one is right and wrong and why. In real life, we're probably going to have things that are more like these questions in the middle, and those are going to be harder to shake out. So as these sanctuary cities try to defend their rights, largely using the 10th Amendment, we're probably going to see a lot of these arguments start to shake out. And with those two standards being a little confusing, you can make a statement, but you can't not make a statement. It's not totally clear how this will shake out in the middle. But at least now you have some idea how this is shaken out in the past. So as these things are discussed, you have an idea probably where they're headed. Okay, if you guys want to help me out, there are ways to do it in my link tree. Allison, thank you so much for your support. I really, really appreciate it. And let me know in the comments if this made sense, if you have any other questions, and if this is all clear as mud. And as usual, you keep watching these, I'll keep making them. Thanks a lot, guys.